Chapter 3. The Royal Teton. 4 days passed without any unusual occurrence, and I tried to realize fully the deeper significance of my recent experiences. It was just growing dark on the evening of the 5th day when there was a sound of tapping on the window of my room. I looked out, and on the window-sill stood a snow-white dove with a tiny card in its mouth. I stepped to the window and opened it. The dove walked in and stood calmly waiting. I took the card and read the message, which was written in the same beautiful script as the previous one, but this time in gold ink on a white card. On it were the words, "Be at our meeting place at 7 in the morning. Signed, Saint Germain." As soon as I had taken the card, the dove flew to my shoulder and rubbed its head against my face, as if conveying a message of love, flew again to the window, and was gone like an arrow. I put the card away carefully, hoping it would remain, but the next morning, as I looked for it before starting on my hike, it had been dissolved. The golden card, on which the first message was written, had lasted into the 3rd day, for I looked at it several times, hoping I could keep it permanently. When I found it had been returned to the Universal, my heart sank, so great was my disappointment. To make the hike of 10 miles and be there at 7 in the morning, I knew would make it necessary for me to leave shortly after midnight. I arose early and was on my way at 3 o'clock. By walking rapidly, I reached the forest just at daybreak. I had not gone far until a plaintive cry came to my ears. Before realizing it, I answered in the same tone, so involuntary was my response. There was a rush of something through the timber, and my friend the panther bounded toward me, the very embodiment of joy. I patted it, and together we proceeded on our way to the meeting place. Promptly, at 7 o'clock, Saint Germain stepped right out of the atmosphere, greeting me with open arms. Again, he handed me the crystal cup, filled this time with a clear, sparkling liquid. I drank it, and the taste was not like anything I had ever physically experienced before. It was almost like the juice of grapefruit, iced, but sparkling and effervescing. The moment I drank it, a sensation like lightning went through my body, carrying the feeling of its sparkling activity into every vein. Saint Germain then gave the panther a little brown cake, which it quickly devoured. In a moment its hair stood straight up, and he remarked, "Your friend will never again kill deer." For the coming experience and instruction, it will be necessary to leave your body here on the mountainside, because you have not yet called forth the inner power enough to enable you to take it where we are going today. The panther will be the guard for you, and as an extra precaution, I will place the cloak of invisibility around both. We will go to the Royal Teton. Come." Instantly, I stood out in my finer body, clothed in a rich garment of self-luminous golden fabric. "Observe carefully the material in which you are clothed," he continued. "The substance composing the garment you wear has certain extraordinary qualities and powers of its own, one of which is to enable its wearer to lift and transport physical objects. The garment itself possesses pure electronic energy and can be used to move objects, the same as the force one uses through his physical body. This is a phenomenal activity that the great masters of light have given permission to be used for the first time on this planet. For the benefit of my readers, I want to state clearly and unmistakably that while I was clothed in a body which did function in 4 dimensions during these experiences, yet it gave me the ability to feel and handle solid objects in the physical world, the same as everyone can do in his own physical body. The body I used this time was not that which is sometimes called the astral body. We soon reached the top of a majestic mountain that stands sentinel over one of the most beautiful scenic belts in the United States. Vast forests lay beneath us, and great ranges of mountains, with their treasures of mineral wealth still untouched, stretched as far as the eye could see. Going to a point where huge masses of stone lay in confusion as if giants had hurled them in a war upon each other, Saint Germain touched a great boulder. Instantly the enormous mass tipped out perhaps 4 feet away from its original position. He motioned me to follow. We entered, and to my astonishment, stood before a large bronze door. "This has been here since before the sinking of Atlantis, more than 12,000 years ago," he explained. He stepped forward and pressed certain points on the door. The great mass of bronze, weighing many tons, swung slowly open and admitted us into a spacious chamber from which a stairway, cut in the solid rock, led downward. We descended some 200 feet and entered another space, circular in shape. Saint Germain stepped across the room to a door opposite the stairs and placed his right hand against it. As it opened, we stood before the entrance of a tube elevator. The interior looked like frosted silver, and in answer to my thought he said, "Yes, but harder and stronger than steel and indestructible." A flat disc of the same metal, fitting the tube quite closely, rose within it to the level of the floor. The platform was controlled and operated entirely by the master. He stepped upon it, and I followed. The door closed, and we began to descend. It was a long way down, although we did not move rapidly. The platform came to a stop at another bronze door of entirely different design. "We have descended 2,000 feet into the very heart of the mountain," he commented, as we stepped out of the tube. The space in which we stood was of peculiar design and arrangement. It formed an oblong from east to west, whose northeast and northwest corners had been cut on an angle. This formed an outer court, or reception room. The heavy bronze door from the tube elevator opened into the court on the northeast wall. In the north side were 2 other large bronze doors exactly like, entering into a great audience hall. On the northwest wall was still another, a 4th door, like the one through which we had come. Opposite, on the long, unbroken stretch of the south wall, hung an immense tapestry. It was made of most unusual material, and while the weave was coarse, yet the thread, or fiber, was as soft as camel's hair. The background was of a delicate cream color, and against this were 2 life-size figures representing god beings of great majesty and power. The one on the right was masculine, the other feminine. Both were standing as if in the act of commanding cosmic forces to obey their decrees. The masculine figure wore a full flowing robe of some rich material of a deep sapphire blue, banded and heavily embroidered in gold. It was evidently a robe of state or symbol of authority. Under the outer robe was a tunic of golden fabric, metal-like in appearance. A sunburst of rubies, diamonds, sapphires, and emeralds covered the chest. The waist was encircled by a jeweled belt, and from it hung a panel about 12 inches long. It, too, was heavily encrusted with the same kinds of jewels. The tunic reached to the knees, and the lower edge was trimmed with a band about 4 inches wide of heavy embroidery in silk of the same color as the jewels. The entire effect gave one the impression that the garments were all self-luminous. The feet were clad in sandal-like boots of golden leather, reaching almost to the knees, very ornate and laced with sapphire blue cords. A band of gold about 1.5 inches wide rested halfway down upon the forehead, binding the figure's wavy golden hair, which hung to about 6 inches below the shoulders. The complexion was very fair, with a soft pink tint, and the eyes were a deep violet blue. The fingers of the left hand rested lightly over the heart, and the upraised right hand held a blazing crystal rod of power and authority. The lower end was shaped to a point, and on the top rested a sphere about 3 inches in diameter that gave off rays of sparkling white light. One knew unmistakably that the figure portrayed was in the act of wielding gigantic power and was a manipulator of some mighty cosmic force. The entire appearance suggested fullest youth, and yet the wisdom of the ages spoke through the eyes of a hoary past. The feminine figure's robe of authority was a deep violet, banded with golden embroidery similar to that of her companion. The underdress was a soft, golden, shimmering material that came almost to the floor. The thread used in weaving the tapestry and to represent the garments must have been the same which had actually composed the material in the original clothing. This being wore a jewelled girdle with its panel reaching about 2 inches below the knees, and encrusted with the same kinds of jewels as those of the masculine figure. The toe of her right sandal was just visible beneath the edge of the dress, and was made of golden leather. Her headdress was a plain band of gold, exactly like his, and the eyes were the same violet blue, but lighter in shade, her golden hair falling to the knees. On the chest, suspended from a golden chain, hung a large 7-pointed star, cut from a single diamond. In her left hand she held a crystal sphere, about 6 inches in diameter, and in her right, uplifted like that of the other figure, was a scepter of most strange design. About 2/3 of the lower portion was made of gold, terminating in a spear-shaped point, the upper third composed of a crystal-like substance radiantly luminous. This formed into a design at the top, similar to a fleur-de-lis, except that the middle point was much longer and tapered to a slender apex formed by its 4 facets. The curved leaf on the right of the central portion was a beautiful pink, and on the left a deep sapphire blue, but the middle one was crystal white. All were transparent and glowed with light. The gold and crystal-like portions blended with each other perfectly, for there was no line of demarcation between the two substances. Her scepter symbolized the 3 activities of the creative force. The crystal ball in her left hand revealed the unmanifested perfection of the future in cosmic activity. Both scepters represented the drawing and directing of the creative power into universal substance for special manifestation. They were radiant and beautiful, even in the tapestry, and I could but wonder what they must have been in reality. Saint Germain stood patiently waiting while I studied the whole concept, so fascinated was I by the magnificence of the entire work. "These 2 great beings were the founders of this retreat," he remarked, as we turned and passed through the bronze door on our right, and entered a large room which one realized instantly was used as a great council hall for some kind of sacred ceremonial purpose. The whole atmosphere was one of magnificence and beauty. Words utterly failed to convey that which my eyes beheld and my feelings experienced. It took me some moments to become accustomed to the dazzling sight and the splendor of my surroundings. This room was at least 200 feet long and 100 feet wide, with a ceiling about 50 feet high. A soft white light, which Saint Germain explained was an omnipresent force that the Great Ones always used for light, heat, and power, flooded the entire place. About 20 feet of the side walls and far end of the room were formed in white onyx. Where this formation ended, the builders had cut through a great vein of virgin gold more than 2 feet in width. The main stretch of both side walls was of a light blue granite, but near the end from which we entered, the natural structure changed into rose granite of a still finer quality. The surface of the walls, ceiling, and floor had been highly polished, evidently by some remarkable process. The arched ceiling, rising some 10 feet higher than the side walls, was inlaid with a most unique design. Directly in the center was a disk of gold at least 12 feet in diameter. Filling it so that the points touched the circumference, blazed a 7-pointed star composed entirely of yellow diamonds, a solid mass of brilliant golden light. Radiating from this central sun were 2 rings of color, each about 12 inches wide, forming a definite band of light around the star, and of these the inner band was rose-pink and the outer an intense violet. The background against which this star lay looked like golden frost, the star itself sending down long rays of gleaming crystal light. Around this design were placed 7 smaller discs, each about 2 feet in diameter, representing the planets of our system, and the 7 rays of color within the spectrum of white light. The surface of every disc was velvet-like in its softness, and only the clearest, most intense positive shade of each color had been used. As I learned later, at certain times, for special purposes, great cosmic beings pour through these discs their powerful currents of force. Here it is received by the great illumined and unselfish ones, known as the ascended masters of light, who again send it forth to the humanity of our earth. This radiation affects the 7 ganglionic centers within every human body on our planet, as well as all animal and plant life. The background of the entire ceiling was the color of a very clear sky on a brilliant moonlight night, yet the surface was highly refractive. In the center, at the far end of the hall, about 35 feet from the floor in the wall itself, was a large eye, at least 2 feet across. This represented the all-seeing eye of the Creator, forever watching over his creation, and from whom nothing can be hidden. A tremendous power was focused through this eye at certain times for the accomplishment of specific results. I could but wonder, as I contemplated it, what my sensations would be were I to see that power in full operation. Perhaps 40 feet from the far end of the east wall, stretching about 70 feet in length and 30 feet in height, was a panel of some precipitated material. It had been placed a little more than 5 feet above the floor level and sunken into the side wall for a depth of 2 inches, making a concave surface around the entire edge. The substance composing it looked like beautiful velvet of a deep indigo blue, yet it was not a fabric of any kind. The nearest physical material to which one could compare it would be that of a mineral. This substance is not in use in the outer world of mankind anywhere, but it can be, and is, sometimes precipitated by the great ascended masters of light for a special purpose. Saint Germain explained that the panel had been precipitated and served as a universal mirror for the instruction of initiates and inner members of a group of highly evolved beings. These great ones work ceaselessly helping the humanity of our earth to become perfected men and women, and enable them to manifest in their outer lives the same great perfection and dominion as did Jesus Christ. There is no outer organization of these perfected beings. Only by living and expressing this perfection through self-correction of human weaknesses and full adoration to the divine being within, can an individual draw himself into association with those working at this high level of attainment. Upon this panel, said Saint Germain, are projected scenes of earth, pictures in the ethers, the Akashic records and activities taking place on Venus or at any other point, which those instructing wish to make visible to the students. Such scenes are not only pictures of the past and present, but can portray activities into the far future. These you shall see later. We passed through the last door on our right and entered a room whose dimensions were about 80 feet long, 40 wide, and 20 high, with an arched ceiling similar to that in the large hall from which we had just come. The entire interior surface of this room is made of frosted gold, and the purple and green veining you see on the walls as if embossed is precipitated, he continued. At the far end, and on the side wall to our right, reaching from floor to ceiling, was a framework made of white metal that looked like frosted silver. In this framework, resting upon roller bearings, were containers made of the same metal. The lids of these containers gave classifications in hieroglyphics of the contents on the 4 spindles within each, the hieroglyphics being embossed upon every lid. The spindles were at least 10 inches long, and around every one had been wound a ribbon, about 8 inches wide, made of pressed gold, alloyed with some material that made it tough and pliable, yet no thicker than a piece of ordinary writing paper. The length of the ribbons of gold on the spindles varied from 7 to 50 feet, and on each were characters as if etched into the gold by something like a stylus. These characters had been so perfectly done as to make the whole appear like script. "These records are the fulfilling of my promise to you," said Saint Germain, as he indicated a particular section at the far end of the side wall. They describe the city, country, and civilization which once existed where the Sahara Desert is now, during the time in which you were my son, and I the ruler of that ancient empire. This room contains records of many countries, and the rise and fall of many civilizations. Handing me one of the spindles, he released the fastening, and I found, to my astonishment, that I could read its contents. "I am enabling you to do this," he continued, "by temporarily raising your consciousness and calling forth the hidden memory, the former record of these experiences which you once lived through. The matter of knowing God and His universe is but a contacting of the life record in every form. All forms contain life, and within the light emanation of every form is recorded its entire past, which anyone may train himself to discover and understand, if he be willing to give his attention and time to the self-discipline necessary to still the confusion in the outer activity of his everyday existence. This eternal record within all things has existed from the beginning. In ages past, humanity manifested perfection in every way. This former condition of the race has been chronicled by historians as the Garden of Eden, Eden, or Edon, meaning divine wisdom. As the conscious attention or the outer activity of the mind was allowed to rest upon the world of the physical senses, the divine wisdom, the all-knowing activity of consciousness, became clouded or covered over, and the cosmic divine plan of the individual's life became submerged. perfection and conscious control by mankind over all form, was hidden and forgotten along with it. Man became sense-conscious instead of God-conscious, and so manifested that to which his attention was directed, and which he thought most upon. He deliberately and consciously turned his back upon the perfection and dominion with which the Father endowed him in the beginning. He created his own experiences of lack, limitation, and discord of every kind. He identified himself with the part instead of the whole, and, of course, imperfection was the result. All mankind's limitation is the result of the individual's own misuse of the God attribute of free will. He compels himself to live within his own creations until, by the direct volition of the outer activity of his mind, he again consciously looks back to his royal beginning, God, the great source of all. When this occurs, man will begin to remember that which he once was, and may become again, whensoever he chooses to look once more at the great cosmic blueprint of himself. The record you have been enabled to read described the life and the people as we saw it taking place 70,000 years ago. You had much to do with the work of making these records in several lives which have not yet been revealed. We crossed the council hall, entering the opposite door, and found a room similar in size to the one we had just left, with two smaller rooms adjoining on the north wall. In the larger room, covering almost the entire wall surface, was more metal framework filled with containers quite like those in the other room. These rooms, he continued, contain only gold and jewels that are to be used for a special purpose, which will bless the entire world when mankind has transcended its unbridled selfishness. Here he drew forth a container filled with gold coin, and went on explaining, "This is Spanish gold, lost at sea, and we, seeing it would not be recovered by other means, brought it here through the activity of certain forces which we govern. Later, in a time that is rapidly approaching, it will again be sent forth for use in the outer world. In these containers," indicating another section, "gold is stored from the lost continents of Mu and Atlantis, the ancient civilizations of the Gobi and the Sahara deserts, Egypt, Chaldea, Babylonia, Greece, Rome, and others. If all this gold were to be released into the outer activity of the world, it would compel sudden readjustment in every phase of human experience. At present, it would not be the part of wisdom. The infinite wisdom and power of these great cosmic masters, who have been the guardians of the race since its first appearance upon earth, is almost beyond the comprehension of the human mind. No one in this world ever accumulated a great amount of wealth without the assistance and radiation of some ascended master. There are occasions in which individuals can be used as a focus of great wealth for a specific purpose, and at such times greatly added power is radiated to them, for through it they can receive personal assistance. Such an experience is a test and opportunity to expand their light. All unusual accomplishment that takes place in human activity, no matter what the particular channel may be, is always attained through the assistance of superhuman love, wisdom, and power from an ascended master, because he has transcended all limitations of the physical world, and for this reason, more than ordinary success is due to his greater power through radiation. In 1887, the ascended host of masters established a school on the inner planes for the specific purpose of instructing those who have misused wealth and revealing fully the results of their mistakes. Such as these are taken and told the truth concerning the universal law governing all wealth, and the results that come from influencing others to perpetuate their wrong ideas and mistakes. They are given complete freedom to accept or reject the proof offered. They always accept and abide by the instructions given. We next entered the two smaller rooms, which were also equipped with the same kind of containers, only not as large. These were filled with jewels of all kinds, diamonds, rubies, pearls, emeralds, and sapphires, classified as to variety and quantity. Smilingly he turned to me and said, "Now you know and understand that the great God-Self is the only real owner and controller of all wealth. That presence appoints keepers of his treasures on every plane of life, whether it be light, wisdom, substance, or physical riches. You are calm and poised, I see, while we are observing this phase of our activity, and that is well. It reveals your inner strength and ability to do what is now ready to be accomplished, as soon as you are prepared outwardly. This will soon come about, I assure you. You have been shown proof that it is we who really govern the wealth of the world and use it but as a test of the soul strength of the individual. It is always a trust given to those who should be strong enough to use it only constructively, but few, very few, really pass that test under the temptation existing in the world at large today. If we choose, we can raise the humblest of God's children, who have sufficient preparation, into wealth, power, and prominence, if, by so doing, help can be given to many others through such accomplishment. After examining other containers filled with more jewels, we turned and re-entered the council hall. Looking toward the entrance through which we had first come, I saw my loved ones, Lotus and our son, in charge of one of the ascended masters whom St. Germain said was known as Amen Bey. After greetings had been exchanged, we were conducted to seats before the panel on the east wall. In groups of from 3 to 12 came the blessed ones of the ascended host, until 70 of them were seated. A great hush fell upon all assembled, and for a few moments the silence was breathless, expectant. A ball of soft white light began to form in front of the panel, increasing rapidly in size and brilliance until it became an oval at least 7 feet in height. As though born from within the light itself stepped a most glorious being, tall, majestic, and powerful. He made the sign uniting the finite with the infinite, and in a voice that thrilled every atom of mind and body, asked if all were ready. A blazing light flashed forth from the substance that composed the panel, until it looked like a mirror of living light. In a moment this changed into a crystal-clear atmosphere, and it then became a cosmic screen upon which living pictures in all dimensions could be portrayed, with no limit to the space that could be observed. It was self-evident that everything which had or ever could take place in all eternity might be made visible on this screen, if the directing intelligence so desired. The first scenes portrayed the continent of Mu, the activity and accomplishment of its people, and the height to which that civilization attained. This covered a period of thousands of years. Then came events that surely must have been a reign of terror to the inhabitants of that land. A cataclysm occurred which tore the surface of the earth until all collapsed within itself. The ancient land of Mu sank beneath the waves of what is now the Pacific Ocean, where it still rests, wrapped in its mantle of water. Again it will arise, and once more absorb the light and life of the physical sun. Next came the growth to beauty, wisdom, and power of Atlantis, a great continent covering a large part of what is now the Atlantic Ocean. At that time, there existed solid land between Central America and what today is Europe. The things accomplished in that age were tremendous, but again the people's misuse of the mighty God energy overwhelmed them, and as things were thrown more and more out of balance, the tearing apart of the earth's surface by cataclysmic action was re-experienced. Left but a small remnant of Atlantis, merely an island in mid-ocean, cut off from close contact with the rest of the civilized world. The east and west portions of the land had sunk beneath the Atlantic Ocean, leaving only the island called Poseidonis. It had been the heart of the then known civilized world, and preparation was made to protect and preserve its most important activities as a central focus, to carry forward certain unfinished work. In that period, very great attainment was reached, both spiritually and materially. The mechanical development of this cycle reached a very high state of achievement, and one of its most remarkable expressions was the perfection of their aerial navigation. The air transportation of our modern life is as yet very crude and primitive compared to what was then on Atlantis. The great masters of light and wisdom made this possible for the people of Poseidonis because they inspired, instructed, protected, and revealed knowledge of great advancement in every phase of human activity. A large portion of these people became aware of the great inner God power within the individual. But as before, the human side of their nature or outer activities again usurped the great energy. Selfishness and misuse of this transcendent wisdom and power gained the ascendancy to even greater height than before. The masters of the ancient wisdom saw the people were building another destructive momentum and that a third cataclysm was threatening. They warned the inhabitants again and again as previously, but only those who served the light gave heed. Great buildings were constructed of imperishable material, where records were placed that have been preserved through the centuries. These remain in a state of perfect preservation now at the bed of the Atlantic Ocean, hermetically sealed. They will be brought to the light of day by the great ones who directed their preparation and control their protection. In them are recorded humanity's advance and accomplishments of that period, so there has been no permanent loss to mankind of the activities of the Atlantean civilization. Beside the preserving of such records, great wealth, principally gold and jewels, was transferred at that time to other points of safety. This has been and will continue to be guarded over the centuries and used at a future time for the uplift and advancement of generations yet unborn. The final cataclysm spent its momentum, and the last remaining fragment of a once world empire sank to rest for purification through the centuries beneath the present Atlantic Ocean. The remembrance of Atlantis and her people, unlike the lost continent of Mu, has not been entirely forgotten or obliterated in the history of mankind, for it has been recorded in many ways through the centuries. Even though 12,000 years have elapsed since the sinking, fragments of information concerning it still drift to us from most unexpected channels. Myths and legends abound in reference to Atlantis, and these are two avenues which preserve to mankind certain actual conditions that have been upon the earth in one age or another. As time goes on, indisputable proof of its existence and the height of its attainment will be revealed by oceanography, geology, and other scientific data. Then passed before our vision the ancient civilizations of the Gobi and the Sahara deserts, showing the rise and fall of their principal activities. The decline in each of these was due this time not to cataclysmic action, but to being overrun by hordes of primitive souls, taking embodiment in that cycle. Next came pictures of Egypt, her rise and fall, the latter being due to the deliberate misuse of knowledge and power by a large number of the humanity embodied in that land, whose predominant qualities were pride of their intellectual accomplishments and rebellion against the restraint of their lower nature. These always mean failure individually or en masse. Egypt rose to her greatest height by the right use of knowledge and power. These always demand humility, obedience of the intellect to the God-self within, absolute and unconditional control of the human or lower nature in those who seek such gifts if they are to avoid destruction. The souls embodied in Egypt during her decline were not undeveloped, as were those in the civilizations of the Gobi and the Sahara deserts. On the contrary, they had attained the conscious use of knowledge and power and deliberately chose to misuse it. This activity has nothing whatsoever to do with wisdom, for those who are the eternal inheritors of the gifts from that divine goddess must forever be above all temptation to misuse knowledge and power. Wisdom is the right use of all that manifests, and he who realizes this self-evident immutable truth becomes an open door to all good that abides in creation. The reference to Egypt as a land of darkness is most unjust, for out of Egypt in her earlier cycle came very great light, and out of Egypt will again come very great light. The next scene portrayed the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. When the darkness and degradation of those centuries had reached their lowest point, lo, Jesus appeared, pouring out his blazing light and love as the Christ, and through his transfiguration, resurrection, and ascension, such an overwhelming flood of God's perfection spread over the earth that never again can so vast a darkness encompass humanity in any age. The accomplishment of his life stands eternally recorded upon the atmosphere of this planet, and acts as a magnet drawing mankind unto a like perfection. The coming of Jesus was an initiation to the people of our world, and a cosmic command to use the power of divine love in all their future activities. This outpouring of his love to the earth at its darkest cycle became the birth of the Christ child in the individual. He called forth, once again, the cosmic divine blueprint and revealed the decree for the incoming age. That plan is complete dominion over all things finite, through the full stature of the Christ within every human being. Next came the reign of Richard the Lionheart of England. Humanity had little or no knowledge of the real spiritual activity that took place during those years. The same light that inspired Richard's enthusiasm and activities in the Crusades released through his followers and the people of that time certain forces that the ascended host used at inner levels of consciousness. Then came pictures of the recent World War in Europe, and these disclosed the activities that generated it. Only a few individuals know the real cause, and no doubt it is for the best more do not. It is too destructive for the consciousness to contemplate. Nothing can possibly be gained by focusing the attention upon war. This too perhaps was the reason why the period from Richard to the World War was not portrayed. Here the activities of the ascended host were revealed, and we saw them dissolve the cause and greater part of the accumulated momentum of the world's recent conflict. They accomplished it by consciously focusing and directing enormous rays of light, whose power to consume and transmute is too stupendous for finite description. These perfected ones have been watching for the cosmic moment to arrive when they might perform for humanity a service of love that has been long awaited and of which mankind has as yet little or no comprehension. These remarkable pictures continued and revealed activities stretching forth into the far future and affecting the whole earth. They showed many changes to come in the surface of the land itself. One of the most important of these concerning the progress of North America. The divine plan for the future of North America is a condition of intense activity in the greatest peace, beauty, success, prosperity, spiritual illumination, and dominion. She is to carry the Christ light and be the guide for the rest of the earth, because America is to be the heart center of the golden age that is now dimly touching our horizon. The greater portion of the land of North America will stand for a very long time. This has been known for thousands of years, yes, for over 200,000. The pictures continued for nearly 3 hours, portraying many scenes and activities that have entirely escaped the recording of historians in the world of science because of their great antiquity. Wonderful and beautiful as our moving pictures are today, they are mere toys when compared with the living, breathing, actual existence revealed upon this cosmic screen. Here, it was possible to watch the cosmic cause go forth of many events and conditions found upon earth, so that those watching received instruction of most extraordinary magnitude. This inner instruction is of great help to students. At the close of the instruction, Saint Germain presented us to the great ascended master Lanto, who had manifested from within the blazing light, and then to the 70 masters assembled. "We shall rejoice indeed," said Lanto, turning toward us, "when you are again ready to join in the conscious service of the glorious work at hand. This opportunity comes to you through the mighty victories you have won over the human self and outer world. The time is nearing when you shall be privileged to see how truly great those victories are. Each day, accept in its fullness the mighty active presence of the great God within you, and there can exist no such thing as failure anywhere along the path. Every one who sincerely seeks the light is always known to the ascended masters. On New Year's Eve we will meet here again, when there will be 12 guests from Venus. It is our wish that you be present. Saint Germain and Amen Bay will be your sponsors." At a signal, all became silent and received Lanto's blessing of love before returning to their respective fields of service. Most of them simply disappeared from the room within a few moments, and the rest left by the way of the tube. "My children, I see you are unaware of time. It is now 3 o'clock in the morning," remarked Saint Germain, as he turned to say good-bye to Lotus and our son, who, after embracing me, left by way of the outer reception room as we had passed through the first door on the right. "There is one thing more," he continued, "I want you to see before we go." Here is a group of most unusual musical instruments that are used for a special purpose, being constructed or created so as to have a tone of special quality for the work to be done. Here he turned to an organ keyboard and went on explaining. "This seems to be a pipeless organ, but the pipes, which are much smaller than ordinary, are placed within the case. The tone of the whole instrument is superior to anything the earth has ever known before in music. These organs will come into use in the outer world as the incoming golden age moves forward." Next we examine 4 magnificent harps, slightly larger than those in ordinary use in the musical world today. Saint Germain seated himself at one of these and played several chords, to give me some idea of their tone. It was the most wonderful music I have ever heard. "This harp is a surprise for our beloved Lotus," he said, "for on New Year's Eve in this retreat you shall hear the organ and 4 harps played by skilled artists." We finished the inspection of the room and left through the door on the northwest wall. Instead of passing out of the retreat as we had come in, Saint Germain opened a small door on the left and entered a glistening tunnel whose walls sparkled with a crystal-like formation which became instantly illumined by the white light that he always released by manipulating the electronic substance about him. We walked rapidly forward in the tunnel, came to a bronze door that opened at his touch, and stood again under the starlit sky. We remained in perfect silence for an instant. Then, rising to some 500 feet above the ground level, passed swiftly through the air, and a few moments later stood beside my physical body on the southern slope of Mount Shasta, where the panther still guarded. I had been away 22 hours, and as I looked up, dawn was just creeping over the eastern horizon. "Here is your breakfast," announced Saint Germain, as he handed me the crystal cup containing a clear, white, sparkling liquid. "This is both strengthening and refreshing, so you will enjoy hiking home, because your body needs the exertion and activity. I sense something in your mind which is not at ease, or at least is not clear to your consciousness." "Yes," I replied. "I have a question that has been holding my attention for some time, and it is concerning visualization. What is true visualization, and what happens when one does visualize?" "True visualization," he answered, "is God's attribute and power of sight, acting in the mind of man. When one consciously pictures in his mind a desire he wishes fulfilled, he is using one of the most powerful means of bringing it into his visible, tangible experience. There is much confusion and uncertainty in the minds of many concerning what actually happens when one visualizes or makes a mental picture of something he desires. No form ever came into existence anywhere in the universe unless someone had consciously held a picture of that form in his thought, for every thought contains a picture of the idea within it. Even an abstract thought has a picture of some kind, or at least a picture that is one's mental concept of it. I will give you an exercise by which one may develop, consciously control, and direct his visualizing activities for definite accomplishment. There are several steps to the process, which every student can use at any and all times. The practice does bring visible, tangible results when really applied. The first step is to determine upon a definite plan or desire to be fulfilled. In this, see that it is constructive, honorable, and worthy of your time and effort. Be sure to examine your motive for bringing such a creation into expression. It must be honest, both toward yourself and the rest of the world, not merely to follow a whim or gratify appetites of the physical senses. Remember, there is a vast difference between youth, desire, and appetite. Youth is the fulfilling of the great universal law of service. Desire is the expanding activity of God, through which manifestation is constantly sustained and is perfection enlarging itself. Appetite is but habit, established by the continued gratification of the feeling nature, and is but energy, focused and qualified by suggestions from the outer activity of life. Be very sure that there is no lurking feeling within that you would be glad to benefit at the expense of another. A real student, and only such a one will get the benefit out of this kind of training, takes the reins into his own hands and determines to discipline and consciously control the human self. He chooses what shall or shall not be in his world, and through the process of picturing within his mind, designs and brings into manifestation a definitely determined plan of life. The second step is to state your plan in words as concisely and clearly as possible. Write this down. Thus you make a record of your desire in the outer, visible, tangible world. The third step is to close the eyes and see within your mind a mental picture of your desire or plan in its finished, perfect condition and activity. Contemplate the fact that your ability to create and see a picture within your own consciousness is God's attribute of sight acting in you. The activity of seeing and the power to create are attributes of your God self, which you know and feel is within you at all times. God's life and power are acting within your consciousness to propel into your outer world the picture you are seeing and feeling within yourself. Keep reminding the intellect that the ability to picture is an attribute of God, the attribute of sight. The power to feel, experience, and associate with the perfected picture is God's power. The substance used in the world without to make the form in your picture and plan is God's pure substance. Then you must know God is the doer, the doing, and the deed of every constructive form and action that ever has been sent forth into the world of manifestation. When you thus use all the constructive processes, it is impossible for your plan not to come into your visible world. Read your desire or plan over as many times in the day as possible, and always just before retiring. Because on going to sleep, immediately after contemplating the picture in your own mind, a full impression is left upon the human consciousness undisturbed for a number of hours, enabling it to be recorded deeply in the outer activity and allowing the force to be generated and accumulated which propels it into the outer experience life. In this way, you can carry any desire or picture into your consciousness as it enters the great silence in sleep. There it becomes charged by God's greatest power and activity, which is always within the heart of the great silence. Under no circumstances discuss either your desire or the fact that you are visualizing with anyone whatsoever. This is imperative. Do not talk to yourself about it out loud, or even in a whisper, for you should realize that the greater the accumulation of energy generated by your visualization, contemplation, and feeling the reality of your picture, the quicker it will come into your outer experience. Thousands of desires, ambitions, or ideals would have manifested into the outer experience of individuals if they had not discussed them with friends or acquaintances. When you decide to definitely bring about an experience through consciously directed visualization, you become the law, God, the law of the One, to whom there is no opposite. You must make your own decision and stand back of your own decree with all your power. It means you must take an unshakable, determined stand. To do so, know and feel that it is God desiring, God feeling, God knowing, God manifesting, and God controlling everything concerning it. This is the law of the One, God, and God only. Until this is fully understood, you cannot and never will get your manifestation, for the moment a human element enters, you are taking it out of God's hands, and of course it cannot express because you are neutralizing it by the human qualities of time, space, place, and 1,001 other imaginary conditions, which God does not recognize. No one can ever know God as long as he considers a force opposed to God. For whenever he acknowledges that two forces can act, he has a resultant quality of neutralizing activity. When you have neutralization, you have no definite quality either way. You merely have nothing, or no thing, in your manifestation. When you acknowledge God, the One, you have only perfection manifesting instantly, for there is nothing to oppose or neutralize it, no element of time. So is it established unto you, and there is none to oppose what God decrees. Conditions can never improve for anyone until he desires perfection and stops acknowledging a power opposed to God, or that there is something either in or outside of him that can prevent God's perfection from expressing. One's very acknowledgement of a condition that is less than all of God is his deliberate choice of an imperfection, and that kind of choice is the fall of man. This is deliberate and intentional, because he is free every moment to think whatsoever he chooses to think. Incidentally, it takes no more energy to think a thought or picture of perfection than it does one of imperfection. You are the creator localized to design and create perfection in your world and place in the universe. If perfection and dominion are to be expressed, you must know and acknowledge only the law of the One. The One exists and controls completely everywhere in the universe. You are the self-consciousness of life, the one supreme presence of the great flame of love and light. You alone are the chooser, the decreer of the qualities and forms you wish to pour your life into, for you are the only energizer of your world and all it contains. When you think or feel, part of your life energy goes forth to sustain your creation. Cast out of mind, then, all doubt or fear of the fulfillment of that which you are picturing. Should any such thoughts or feelings, which are, after all, but human emanations, that do not contain perfection, come to your consciousness, instantly replace them by the full acknowledgement of yourself and world as the life of God the One. Further than that, be completely unconcerned about it, except during the time you are visualizing. Have no set time in your mind for results, except to know there is only now, just the immediate moment. Take this discipline, use it, and you can manifest a resistless power in action that cannot and never did fail. Always remember you are God picturing. You are God intelligence directing. You are God power propelling. It is God's, your substance, being acted upon. As you realize this and contemplate the fullness of it often, everything in the universe rushes to fulfill your desire, your command, your picture, for it is all constructive, and therefore agrees with the original divine plan for self-conscious life. If the human side of us really agrees to the divine plan and accepts it, there can be no such thing as delay or failure, for all energy has the inherent quality of perfection within it, and rushes to serve its Creator. Perfection is the only predestination there is. As your desire or picture is constructive, you are God seeing His own plan. When God sees, it is an irrevocable decree or command to appear now. In the creation of this earth and system of worlds, God said, "Let there be light," and light appeared. It did not take aeons of time to create light. The same mighty God is in you now, and when you see or speak, it is His attribute of sight and speech which is acting in and through you. If you realize what this truly means, you can command by His full power and authority, for you are His life consciousness, and it is only the self-consciousness of your life that can command, picture, or desire a constructive and perfect plan. Every constructive plan is His plan. Therefore, you know God is acting, commanding, let this desire or plan be fulfilled now, and it is done. Here Saint Germain finished speaking, and bidding me a smiling goodbye, for the time being disappeared from my sight. I turned my footsteps toward home, and the panther trotted close by my side. It had been fully 24 hours without food, and it was not long until it dashed off through the woods and disappeared in the heavy timber. I continued on my way, and arrived home at 11 o'clock, spending the rest of the day trying to realize the full import of what I had been privileged to experience, and how the entire concept of my world had changed so unexpectedly. Chapter 4. Mysteries of the Yellowstone. 7 days passed. It was then the first week in September. On the evening of the 8th day I sat contemplating life and its infinite expressions, when my thought turned naturally to Saint Germain. Immediately an overwhelming love went out to him in deep gratitude for all I had been privileged to experience through his assistance and light. A feeling as if a presence in the room began to come over me like a breath, and looking up suddenly, there he stood, smiling and radiant, the very presence of divinity. "My son," he said, "am I so unexpected a visitor that I surprise you? Surely you know quite well that when thinking of me, you are in contact with me, and when I think of you, I am with you. In meditation, your attention was upon me, and so I appear. Is that not according to the law? Then why not accept it as natural? What one thinks upon, he draws unto himself. Allow me to suggest that you train yourself never to be surprised, disappointed, or your feelings hurt under any circumstances. For perfect self-control of all the forces within you at all times is dominion, and that is the reward for those who tread the pathway of light, for only by correction of the human self can mastery be attained. Remember always that the right to command, which is dominion, is only permanently retained by those who have first learned to obey, because he who has learned obedience to the law of the One becomes a being of cause only, and that cause love. Thus, he in reality becomes the law of the One, through the quality of similarity. Watch so nothing goes out from you except that which is harmonious, and do not allow a destructive word to pass your lips, even in jest. Remember, you deal with a force of some kind every instant of eternity, and you are its qualifier at all times. I have come to take you on an important journey. We will be gone 36 hours. Draw the curtains to your room, lock the doors, and leave your body in bed. It will be guarded until our return. You have made certain inner advancement, and a very interesting, delightful experience and journey are ahead of you. I prepared my body for bed, and soon became very still. A moment later I stood upon the floor outside of my body, clothed in the same golden garment I had worn on my visit to the royal Teton. The sense of density one has about the walls was gone, and as I passed through them the feeling was that which one experiences when walking through a heavy fog, the wall itself losing its sense of density. This time I was clearly conscious of passing through space. I did not ask where we were going, but it was not long until we came to the royal Teton. Toward the east stood the towering Rockies, and beyond them stretched vast plains that will one day be teeming with semi-tropical vegetation, and its people living in peace and abundance. To the west, we could see the Sierra and Cascade Mountains, and still farther on the Coast Range, whose shoreline is all to be changed. Northward we looked down upon the Yellowstone, whose marvelous beauty veils its ancient mysteries and wonders from our present American civilization. The word Yellowstone, explained Saint Germain, has been brought down through the centuries for more than 14,000 years. At that time, the civilization of Poseidonus had reached a very high point of attainment because a great master of light was at the head of the government. It was only during the last 500 years that the decline took place, and the misuse of her great wisdom held sway. Within the present boundaries of the Yellowstone, which are still the same, existed the richest gold mine the world has ever known. It belonged to the government, and much of its wealth was used for experimental and research purposes in chemistry, invention, and science. 37 miles from this place was located a diamond mine. Stones taken from it were the most beautiful yellow diamonds that have ever been found within this earth, before or since that period. Among the gems which came from that mine were a few rare stones of very remarkable beauty and perfection. If properly cut, they showed a tiny blue flame at the center that looked like liquid light. When worn by certain individuals, the radiance from this flame could be seen more than an inch above the surface of the stone. These were held sacred and only used in the highest, most secret rites of the ascended masters. 16 of them are still held in sacred trust by the Brotherhood of the Royal Teton, and will again be brought into use at an appointed time. It was because of these magnificent yellow diamonds that the present name Yellowstone has come down to us. You, my son, were the discoverer of both mines. I will reveal the records that are the physical evidence of what I have just been telling you. These records give the date of their discovery, amount of wealth taken out, length of time operated, description of the machinery used, which handled refractory ores recovering 87% of their value, running of it into bullion while yet in the mine, making unnecessary any operation at the surface, where shipped, and the date of closing and sealing. Here are the duplicate records. In the life on Poseidonus, you lived in a beautiful home with a sister who is now Lotus. Both attained and maintained close contact with the inner God Self, so God was truly in action at all times. You were an official in the Bureau of Mines, and through that connection invented and built a wonderful airship. In it you traveled a great deal over the mountains. One day, while in deep meditation, you were shown the location of these mines, which you later discovered, opened up, and turned over to the government. With this explanation, I will now show you proof of what I have described, although there is not a trace of these mines on the surface today. Come, we will enter the mine itself. Leaving the Royal Teton, I was perfectly conscious of passing through space and moving rapidly until we reached a certain spot in Yellowstone Park. Here we descended and stood before a wall of solid rock. "Do you see any way to enter?" asked Saint Germain, turning to me. "No, but I feel the opening is here," I answered, as I pointed to a certain spot on the granite wall. He smiled, and going up to the place indicated, laid his hand upon it, and in a moment we stood before a metal door, unsealed. "You see," he explained, "we have our own methods of sealing any entrance we choose for protection, and it is impossible for it ever to be found or entered unless we so desire. The substance with which we hermetically seal places and things is drawn from the universal. It is harder than the rock itself, though in appearance exactly like it. In this way we are able to protect entrances to retreats, buildings, buried cities, mines, and secret chambers of the great ascended Brotherhood of Light. many of which have been held in a state of perfect preservation for over 70,000 years. When we no longer have use for such places or things, we return them back to the universal. So you see, all power becomes the willing servitor of one who has conquered himself. All forces of the universe are awaiting our command whenever it is the part of wisdom and love to use them. On the door we faced was a replica of a man's right hand, embossed in the middle itself, at about the level of my shoulder. It looked strikingly like my present physical hand. "Place your hand over this metal one," said Saint Germain, "and press hard." I obeyed. It fitted over the other perfectly. I pressed with all my strength. Slowly the great door opened, and he continued, "You have retained that form and size of hand for several embodiments. It was placed on the door by the government as an honor because you were the discoverer of the mine. That hand is a model of your hand 14,000 years ago." We entered through this door and passed into a long, round tunnel, finally emerging into a great cavity. There, to my utter amazement, I found tools and machinery of various kinds, made of an imperishable white metal, in as perfect a state of preservation as if constructed but yesterday. In the center of the cavity was a shaft. Our present mining engineers would be amazed at the simplicity and perfection of the mining activities of that former age. The same method will again be brought forth into use here in America within the next century. Saint Germain stepped to the shaft and pulled a lever. Soon a cage of peculiar design came to the top. We stepped inside, and he touched a smaller lever within it. As we began moving downward toward the 200-foot level, we came to a station. Continuing on down to the 700-foot level, we stopped. This was the central station, and from it led 5 tunnels like the spokes of a wheel. These were all perfectly round and lined with the same white metal of which the machinery was constructed. It was so thick and strong that only the collapse of the mountain itself could crush it. 2 of the 5 tunnels were driven into the mountain for more than 2,000 feet. In the central station was one engine that handled all the cars. "The white metal, you see," explained Saint Germain, "is a most remarkable discovery, for it is light in weight, tougher than anything known, untarnishable, and imperishable. You may only give a fragmentary description of these marvels that are actual physical proof of the great height of this ancient civilization. Such wonders have existed and are now in your midst, undreamed of until this revelation shall go forth." As we came to the end of the tunnel, he showed me the drills that had been used in that distant day. These drills, he continued, sent forth a tube of blue-white flame about an inch in diameter. They operated at amazing speed, consuming the rock as they passed through. We returned to the station and entered a triangular-shaped room between 2 tunnels. At the far end were containers made of the same white metal. They were about 12 inches square and 3 feet in length. Saint Germain opened one and showed me the wonderful uncut yellow diamonds. I was speechless. They were so beautiful. I think I hear my readers say, "Do you mean to tell me that these were physical?" To that perfectly natural question, I wish to answer, yes, just as physical as the diamonds you wear on your fingers today. Other containers were filled with cut stones of fabulous value. We then returned to the entrance of the mine. Saint Germain closed the door and sealed it as before. No one, not an ascended master, could have distinguished it from the surrounding rock. Rising from the ground, we quickly covered the 37 miles to the gold mine. This time we stood on the very top of the mountain, near a cone-shaped rock that looked perfectly solid. It was about 15 feet in diameter at the base, and perhaps 10 feet in height. "Watch closely," he said as he laid his hand upon it. Slowly, a triangular-shaped section moved out, disclosing a flight of steps leading downward. We descended these steps for some distance and soon came to a cavity at the top of a shaft similar to the one in the diamond mine. "You will notice the absence of crushers," he continued. "Everything is done within the mine itself. Not a thing is handled at the surface." We stopped at the 400-foot level, where there was another immense cavity. Here complete equipment for treating the ore was located. He explained the extreme simplicity of the process used, which seemed incredible. It was so simple. We continued on down to the 800-foot level and saw the same arrangement as in the diamond mine. Here again were tunnels going out from a central point, like the spokes of a wheel. 3 triangular-shaped rooms had been built between these tunnels, containing the remaining output from the mine just before it had been closed. The same white metal containers were here as in the other rooms. Only 3 of them am I allowed to describe. The first receptacle contained nuggets from an ancient riverbed in a placer formation at the 800-foot level, in which the gravel had been slightly cemented together, holding the gold. This condition existed for a depth of 1,200 feet and held immense value. The second container was filled with wire gold from a white quartz vein at the 400-foot level. Another held solid gold discs, weighing 8 pounds each. The place in which they stored all the gold, he explained, was known as the bullion room. There have been duplicate records kept of this mine, the originals being in the record room at the retreat in the Royal Teton, and the duplicates here. We returned to the surface. Once more, Saint Germain sealed the entrance as described, and turning to me again said, "My son, you discovered these mines and, assisted by your colleagues, put them into operation and brought about this perfection. You also made the records on the imperishable metal, which I will show you in the Royal Teton." The Ascended Masters saw that the cataclysm of 12,000 years ago was approaching, and knowing the mines would not be much affected, had them prepared and sealed for use in a far distant age into which we have now entered. At 7 different periods of your many embodiments, the memory and process for making these records has been recalled. You will bring them forth again in the present age to the blessing of all mankind. This accounts for your feeling since childhood of interest in ancient records of all kinds, and that you would have much to do with such work again in this life. Come, we will now return to the Royal Teton. There, in a room adjoining the great audience hall, are these records to which I have referred. It is a place for the preservation of inventions and scientific discoveries. The one we were in our former visit contained only records of the various civilizations. We returned to the retreat, and entered this time by way of the tube as on our first visit. Stepping out, we passed through the second door to the right of the entrance. It opened directly into the scientific record room, a space about 70 by 40 by 15 feet. The entire walls, ceiling, and floor were lined with the same imperishable white metal of which the shelving and containers were constructed. Saint Germain drew out one of the latter and handed me the record I had made of the diamond mine. Again, I was able to read it, but this time he told me to call upon the God-self within, and thus let it reveal the complete former knowledge which I had at that time. The record gave a clear but condensed history of the discovery and operation. He handed me another spindle, and on it was the complete history of the gold mine. "Now that you have seen the physical proof of what I have explained," he said, "I want you to know that I will never tell you anything that I cannot prove." Here he turned toward me with a piercing look in his eyes that passed clear through my mind and body. "My son," he continued, "you have done well, and are calm and poised under these recent experiences. Much depends upon your next step. Focus your entire attention upon the all-controlling God Self within you, and do not forget to hold it there." In the light of what occurred later, it was well he had fortified me with that admonition. With that warning, he led the way across the large audience hall to the great bronze door on the west wall. Placing his hand against it, the panel slowly moved upward until we had entered, and then closed after us. I stopped, immovable with amazement. For I looked upon that which human eyes are rarely, if ever, permitted to behold. And the scene held me motionless. So great was the fascination of its beauty and wonder. About 12 feet in front of me stood a block of snow-white onyx, 3 feet high and 16 inches square. On this rested a crystal sphere filled with a ceaselessly moving, colorless light, in which were points of radiance darting to and fro. The sphere continually sent forth rays of prismatic colors to a distance of about 6 inches. It seemed made of living substance, so constantly did it scintillate. Out of the top of the crystal ball poured forth 3 plumes of flame, one molten gold, one rose pink, and the other electric blue, extending at least 3 feet in height. Near the top, each section bent over like an ostrich plume, graceful, beautiful, and in perpetual motion. The radiance from this gorgeous sphere filled the entire chamber, producing a sensation of electronic energy no words can convey. The light, life, and beauty of that scene simply overwhelm human powers of description. We stepped toward the far end of the room, and there, side by side, stood 3 crystal caskets, each containing a human body. As I came nearer, my heart almost stopped beating, for within were the forms Lotus, our son, and I had used in an ancient embodiment. I recognized them readily, for Lotus still retained some resemblance to that body, but the bodies of our son and myself had features of greater regularity and perfect physiques. All showed the full perfection of a type almost like that of the ancient Greek. They looked as lifelike as though only sleeping. Each had wavy golden hair and was clothed in garments of similar golden fabric to that in the robes worn by the figures in the tapestry. An ascended master had but to look upon these bodies to see registered every vital action experienced in any physical embodiment since that time. Thus they acted as mirrors to record passing activities which, however, left their original perfection unchanged. Each casket stood upon a large base made of the same kind of white onyx as that on which the sphere was placed. These were covered by lids of crystal, fitted very tightly in a groove around the edge, but were not sealed. On the cover of all 3, just over the center of the chest, was a 7-pointed star. Below it were 4 hieroglyphics. At the end, and placed so it would be just over the top of the head, was a 6-pointed star. On the side, just beneath the shoulders, were two clasped hands, and farther down, nearer the feet, was a lighted torch placed so the flame touched the lid of the casket. This flame remained golden, no matter what other colors of light played through the room. At the opposite end was a 5-pointed star under the feet. All the emblems were raised, as if embossed upon the crystal. These bodies, explained Saint Germain, belonged to you three in one particular life when you left the Golden City to do a special work. Your experiences were so terrific, and yet so much good was accomplished in that life, that a great cosmic being appeared and gave the command to preserve them until such time as you could raise your bodies and return to the Golden City. He gave full direction for their preservation, which was faithfully carried out, as you see. Now, you can all realize how important and necessary it is to keep keenly aware of and deeply centered upon the Master Christ's self within, that only God's love, wisdom, and perfection may act through your minds and bodies at all times. At that moment a dazzling light and tremendous power surged through me, and my God's self spoke. Great Master of light, parent, brother, and friend, almighty Son of God, thou hast indeed an everlasting love, and through it thou hast attained thy well-deserved eternal peace and mastery over the 5 lower kingdoms. The great God-self in these children thou lovest so well shall soon come forth in full conscious dominion, to give every assistance thou hast so long desired. For each of God's children has a service to perform which none but he may give. I call forth the great light from the very heart of God to bless you forever. As these words were spoken, a great shaft of light blazed forth, filling the chamber with points of brilliant prismatic colors. They darted everywhere in the room, and all became a blaze of rainbow light, pulsing with life. "See, my son," said Saint Germain, "how perfectly you can let the great God's self express. You shall soon be able to do this consciously and at will, whenever you desire. Notice the stalactite effect on the ceiling and the silver-white appearance of the walls. They are all made of precipitated substance, and the room is maintained at the same comfortable temperature at all times." We crossed to the far end of the chamber and stood before a polished archway in the wall. Saint Germain placed his hand upon it, and a door opened, disclosing the wonderful white metal equipment for making the records. "In the age we are now entering," he continued, "much equipment will be brought into humanity's use that has been preserved, and so will not have to come through either the avenue of invention or discovery. How is it, I asked, that everything in this retreat and the mines is kept so free from dust and the ventilation is so good?" That, he explained, is very simple. The ascended masters use the same force to cleanse and ventilate, by which they produce heat, light, and power. The emanation from any one of them, as they pass through the mines or chambers, instantly consumes all unnecessary substance. It is nearing the 2nd morning since leaving your body, and we must now return. We passed through the audience chamber, out of the door at the left of the tube, and stood once more under the light of the stars. We came back to my room quickly, and a moment later I was again in my body. Saint Germain stood beside me, holding out the familiar crystal cup, filled this time with an amber-colored liquid, I drank it and felt the vivifying effects pass through every cell of my body. "Now, sleep as long as you can," he said, and disappeared from sight. I must have slept soundly, for I awakened many hours later completely refreshed, my body renewed in strength and power. Chapter 5. Inca Memories. The next 10 days passed uneventfully. Through past training, I never went to sleep without holding my attention upon the great God-Self within, and sending a thought of loving gratitude to Saint Germain. On the evening of the 11th day, while retiring, I heard his voice say distinctly, "Come." I had learned to obey that call, and immediately stood outside of my body, passed quickly through space, and in a few moments came to the royal Teton. He stood upon its side awaiting my arrival. This time he had called me to come to where he was. I obeyed and saluted him. "At your service," I said, stepping to his side, and smiling at me he replied, "We have work to do. Let us go." I was fully aware of the direction in which we traveled, certain we were going a little west of south. Soon we saw the lights from a city in Saint Germain. Directing my attention to them, remarked, "Los Angeles." After traveling some distance farther on, we passed over another lighted section, and this time to my inquiry he answered, "Mexico City." We then came to a tropical forest and began to descend. Presently we stood upon the old ruins of an ancient temple. "These are the ruins of Mitla, in the state of Oaxaca, Mexico," he explained. "You three came into embodiment to give assistance as the Inca civilization reached its apex. With the approval of the ascended masters who were directing, you chose to come into the Inca family to give the service needed at that time. Here you were born as the children of an Inca ruler who was a strong soul of great growth and illumination. In deep love for his people, he called to the one supreme God for light, abundance, and perfection to bless them and the land. The Inca's devotion to his source was very great, for he knew and consciously acknowledged the power of the great central sun. This true understanding was taught to the Incan people, and because they knew to what the great central sun referred, used the sun as the symbol of the Godhead. They had real inner understanding, and acknowledged the fullness of the power from this great central sun, which today we call the Christ, for it is the heart of the Christ activity of the universe. Because of the Inca ruler's devotion to both his source and the people, his deep desire for blessing and light to guide and help them was granted, and 14 from the Golden City over the Sahara Desert responded to give him assistance. You, Lotus, and your son were 3 of that 14. When you were 10, Lotus 12, and your son 14, all were placed under my care and direction, to be prepared and trained for the work you did later. At that time I resided in the Golden City, but after the preliminary attunement had taken place, I came to the palace daily and gave the necessary radiation and instruction. This continued for 4 years before it was revealed to your father. The Inca ruler was amazed at the wisdom of his children, and constantly poured out his praise and gratitude to God for thus blessing him. When you were 14, the same great cosmic master who had taken us all to the Golden City at the end of the embodiment in the Sahara civilization appeared to the Inca and told him his petition had been granted in a very real manner. It was from this time on, for over 70 years, that the Incan civilization came to its greatest height. I came daily from the time you were 14. instructed and attuned the Inca ruler as well as you three. You were referred to as the Inca children from the sun. His gratitude, love, and cooperation were wonderful indeed, and he was taught to understand and use the great cosmic law. Your childhood and youth were wonderful, for no cloud came to mar the beauty of that training. Your son was taught the laws of government and the divine duties of a ruler. Lotus, the inner work, and given the full law and consecration of priestess in the temple of the sun. You were taught the cosmic laws of the priesthood, also secretly the generalship of armies. After 10 years of special training in Peru, all three of you were sent north to one of the new colonies of the Incan Empire for the purpose of helping the people to expand their activities and stimulate their progress. You went forth with all the love, honor, and blessing the Inca ruler knew how to give, and established the capital of the colony at what is now Mitla, in the state of Oaxaca, Mexico, whose glory has come down through the centuries. Here you built a great temple under the direction of those in the Golden City, by whom you had been instructed and helped. Lotus was called Mitla in that life, and it was in honor of her that the city was named. Here she served as priestess for more than 40 years. It was one of the most magnificent temples of that period, and no expense was spared, for the secret part of it built below the surface of the earth was to remain, and bear witness to that splendid civilization centuries later. You knew this at the time it was built, and certain definite orders were given and fulfilled concerning it. Because the entire construction was directed by one of the great ascended masters from the Golden City. The outer part was made of massive stones, some of which may still be seen today among the ruins. The interior was lined with marble, onyx, and jade. The jade came from a secret source in the Andes Mountains that has never been revealed to anyone. The coloring of the interior decorative work was most artistic and beautiful, the main color scheme being gold, purple, rose, and shell pink. The inner sanctuary was gold, with designs in purple and white. The chair in which the priestess officiated was also of gold. Here the spiritual power was focused and maintained, which radiated out to the empire and its people. With this explanation as a preliminary, we will now enter the subterranean temple, in which a room has been preserved amidst the ruins of a once great glory. We went some distance farther away when Saint Germain commanded, "Stand back." He focused a ray of mighty power on a pile of great rocks before us. Suddenly, they were thrown in every direction, uncovering a cube of rose-colored granite. He stepped forward and placed his hand upon it. Slowly it turned as if on a pivot, revealing an opening about 3 feet wide with well-defined steps leading downward. We descended 21 steps to a door that seemed to be made of copper, but Saint Germain said it was a combination of metals alloyed so as to make it imperishable. Pressing on a cube of rock to the right of the entrance, the door swung slowly open and admitted us into a small room. At the farther side was a great archway, closed by another massive door. This time he pressed his foot upon a stone of peculiar design in the floor, and the door moved back, disclosing a chamber of immense proportions that seemed very much in need of cleansing and ventilation. No sooner had the thought entered my mind than the place became filled with a powerful violet light, followed by a soft white haze, becoming brilliant as a noonday sun. The cleansing was complete, for everything was fresh, clean, and filled with the fragrance of roses. As we entered the great room, my attention was held by a number of the most remarkable portraits I have ever seen. They were etched on solid gold, in colors true to life. These, Saint Germain explained, are also indestructible. 5 of them are of the Inca ruler, Lotus, your son, you, and myself, all in the likeness of the bodies we used at that time. It was only during the Incan period that this particular kind of art has ever been expressed. Through the devotion of Lotus to her own god flame at that time, she attracted a great master from Venus who taught her. That kind of art was different from anything known on earth in any age. The master from Venus only allowed a certain number to be made, because this particular type of art was centuries ahead of its time, and therefore was not permitted to be used at that period of the world's development. However, it will come forth in the present golden age into which we have now entered. My son, oh, that the people of America could only understand what tremendous possibilities stand before them. Waiting, waiting, waiting for them to turn away from creeds, cults, dogmas, isms, and all else that binds and limits, by keeping their attention from the great God present within their own hearts. Oh, that they might realize what freedom, power, and light await their service, dependent only on their recognition and use of the great loving presence within, breathing through them each moment. Know and feel the almighty control it has over all manifestation. Oh, could they only realize that their bodies are the temples of the Most High, a living God, who is ruler of heaven and earth, that they might know what it means to love that mighty self, talk to it, acknowledge it in all things, and feel the reality of that presence with at least as great a certainty as they do other persons and things. If they could only feel the closeness and reality of the great presence deeply, even for a moment, nothing could ever again stand between them and the same mighty supreme accomplishment as Jesus and other ascended masters have attained. O America, beloved children of the light, let this great God presence, its wisdom and power surge through you now, and see how quickly God's kingdom can and will manifest upon earth. America is the way shore among the nations, bearing the light that heralds the incoming golden age. Regardless of her present conditions, that light shall burst forth and consume the shadows that seek to disrupt her ideals and love for the great God Self. We then passed through a door at the right, where we found more imperishable records, this time of the Incan civilization, and the important part it played in that cycle. You recalled the process for making these records from the memory of your life 14,000 years ago, remarked Saint Germain. They will be transported to the royal Teton together with the portraits, for this secret temple has completely fulfilled its usefulness and is now to be dissolved. Soon, beautiful, glistening beings appeared and removed the portraits and records. When they had finished, he returned to the entrance. We walked to some distance away. Saint Germain focused his attention for a few moments upon the position of the secret temple and stood very silent. I felt a sudden stillness grip and hold me motionless. There was a great rumbling like an earthquake. In a moment all was over, and the secret temple, which had been the most magnificent creation of its day, collapsed into ruins. I could but gasp at Saint Germain's stupendous power. Truly the great ascended masters are gods. It is no wonder in the mythology of the ancients that their activities have been brought down to us in the guise of myth and fable. They wield tremendous God power at all times, because they hold with unwavering determination to the great God presence, and hence all power is given unto them, for they are all perfection. When Jesus said, Verily, verily, I say unto you, the works that I do shall ye do also, and greater works than these shall ye do, He knew whereof he spoke, continued Saint Germain. He came forth to reveal the conscious dominion and mastery that it is possible for every human being to attain and express while still here on earth. He showed the dominion of the ascended Master, and proved to mankind that it is possible for every one to so call forth his God-self that he can consciously control all things human. The great ascended Masters of love, light, and perfection, who have guided the expansion of the light in humanity on this planet from the beginning, are no figment of anyone's imagination. They are real, visible, tangible, glorious, living, breathing beings, of such love, wisdom, and power that the human mind gasps at the immensity of it. They work everywhere in the universe with complete freedom and limitless power to do naturally all that the average individual considers supernatural. They are wielders of such power and manipulators of such force as to stagger the imagination of the person in the outer world. They are the guardians of the race, and as in the world of physical education, various grades of teachers are provided to guide the development of the individual's growth from childhood to maturity and then beyond, preparing him for special work, so do the ascended Masters of perfection exist to educate and help the individual, that he too may expand his consciousness beyond ordinary human expression. Thus he develops his superhuman attributes, until, like the student graduating from college, the one under the care and instruction of an ascended Master graduates out of his humanity into the full continuous expression of his divinity. The ascended Master is an individual who by self-conscious effort has generated enough love and power within himself to snap the chains of all human limitation, and so he stands free and worthy to be trusted with the use of forces beyond those of human experience. He feels himself the oneness of omnipresent God, life. Hence all forces and things obey his command, because he is a self-conscious being of free will, controlling all by the manipulation of the light within himself. It is through the radiation or outpouring of this light, which is really his own luminous essence of divine love, that an ascended Master is able to help those who come under his care and direction. When such an outpouring to a student takes place, his own inner bodies, and by that I mean his emotional, mental, and causal bodies, absorb the Master's luminous essence, and the light within them glows and expands like a spark which one fans into a flame. This luminous essence has within it the highest force in the universe, for it dissolves all discord and establishes perfect balance in all manifestation. The ascended Master's body is constantly pouring out rays of his light essence upon the discords of earth, dissolving them as the rays of force which we call light and heat from our physical sun dissolve a fog. The radiation they pour out to humanity on earth is consciously drawn energy to which they give quality, and again send it out to accomplish a definite result. In this way they give protection thousands and thousands of times to persons, places, conditions, and things, of which mankind is totally oblivious, going on its appointed way, serenely unconscious of its protectors and benefactors. In this kind of activity the ascended Masters are able to change the bodies they function in like one ordinarily changes his clothes, for the cellular structure is always under conscious control, and every atom is obedient to their slightest direction. They are free to use one or more bodies if the work they desire to do requires it, for their ability to assemble or dissolve an atomic body is absolutely unlimited. They are all powerful manifestors of all substance and energy, for the forces in nature which mean the four elements are their willing and obedient servants. These glorious beings who guard and help the evolving human race are called the ascended masters of love, light, and perfection. They are all the word master implies, because by bringing forth the love, wisdom, and power of the God-self within, they manifest their mastery over all that is human. Hence they have ascended into the next expression above the human, which is the superhuman, divinity, pure, eternal, all-powerful perfection. The humanity of earth frequently, in its ignorance and limitation, presumes to pass judgment upon and express various opinions about Jesus and many others of the ascended host. That practice is one of the most binding things it can indulge in, for in such activity the criticism and judgment sent forth in this way simply return to its generator, and thus mankind is bound more tightly to its self-created suffering and limitation. The activity of the law is that the ascended masters, having freed themselves from human limitations, have become a blazing outpouring of light, into which no human thought of discord can possibly enter. This compels all destructive thought, creation, and feeling to return to its sender and bind him still more closely in the chains of his own creation. If human beings could see their own thoughts, feelings, and words go out into the atmosphere upon the ethers, gather and gather more of their kind, and return, they would not only be amazed at what they give birth to, but would scream for deliverance. And if for no other reason than to blot such creation out of mind, they would with full determination face their own divinity and enter into it. Thoughts and feelings are living, pulsating things. The individual who knows that will use his wisdom and control himself accordingly. Jesus is to mankind gaining its experience on this earth as the great God-self within every human being is to the personal or outer self. He revealed the master record to the outer world, and he is still the living proof of the individual's ability to free himself from all limitation and to express divinity as was originally intended, for the first condition in which humanity existed was wholly harmonious and free. When some of those individuals who study life and the laws of the universe more deeply than the mass of Earth's children become aware of the fact that there are ascended masters, they often desire to go to these great ones for instruction. While in many instances this is an unconscious upreaching of the soul within to the greater light, yet the personal self little realizes in what relation it stands to those great beings who are wholly divine. There is a way by which an intensely earnest and determined student may make contact with one of them, but that can only be through the activity of enough love and discipline of the personality. If the motive for such contact be for the gratification of curiosity, thinking to prove or disprove the ascended master's existence, to merely solve a problem, or to convince a doubt in the personality, it will never come about. Rest assured of that, for the ascended host are never concerned with satisfying the human side of any student. Their entire effort is with the expansion of the God-self within, so that its power may be released forcefully enough to snap the limitations in the human self that do not give it a perfect vehicle for use in the mental, emotional, and physical worlds of manifestation. These are the realms of thought, feeling, and action. Human weaknesses and limitations simply impair the vehicle that should be trained and kept in the best possible condition, as an efficient servant, for the use of the great inner God-self. The human body with its faculties is God's temple of energy, which the great God-presence provides, and through this outer self it wishes to express a perfect divine plan or design. If the uncontrolled sense appetites and demands of the personality waste the God energy, so the inner presence is not given command of the vehicle. It steadily withdraws. The human self loses the power to manipulate mind and body, and the temple collapses into decrepitude and dissolution. We then have the condition the world calls death. The person who seeks to contact an ascended master in the visible, tangible, living, breathing body, without the preparation needed to gradually attune his own outer structure and mind, is in the same position a child in kindergarten would be were he to see a college professor and insist on learning the ABCs under him. The ascended masters are really great batteries of tremendous power and energy, and whatever touches their radiance becomes highly charged with their light essence, through the same activity that makes a needle kept in contact with a magnet take on its qualities and become a magnet also. All their help and radiation is forever a free gift of love. This is the reason they never use any of their force to compel. The law of love, the law of the universe, and the law of the individual do not permit the ascended master to interfere with the free will of the individual, except at those periods of cosmic activity in which the cosmic cycle supersedes that of the individual. It is during these times the ascended master may give more than ordinary assistance. The earth has entered such a cycle now, and the greatest outpouring of the light the earth has ever known is being and will continue to be shed upon humanity to purify it and reestablish the order and love that is imperative for the future maintenance of our planet and the system of worlds to which we belong. All that does not or will not come into the action of order, balance, and peace must of necessity pass into some other schoolroom of the universe and work out its own understanding of this law in some other way than is to be the expression of the future life upon our planet. There is only one passport into the presence of these great ones, and that is enough love poured out to one's own God-self and to them, united with the determination to root out of the human all discord and selfishness. When an individual becomes determined enough to serve only the constructive plan of life, he disciplines perfectly his human nature, no matter how unpleasant the task. Then he will automatically draw to himself the attention of an ascended master, who will take note of his struggles and pour out courage, strength, and love, sustaining him, until he maintains the feeling of his permanent contact with the inner God-self. The ascended master knows and sees all concerning the student, for he reads clearly the record which the student has made in his own aura. This reveals the state of the disciple's development, his strength, as well as his weakness. The ascended master is the all-knowing mind and all-seeing eye of God, for from him nothing can be hidden. The one who wishes to come into the visible, tangible presence of the ascended host should understand that unless he makes himself a radiating sun of love, light, and perfection which the master can expand and use as a part of himself, that he can direct to any place consciously at will, he would be useless, merely a barnacle and drain upon the master's work and world. If the student has not, be not willing to, or does not discipline the personal self, so it is calm in mind, peaceful and loving in feeling, strong in body, he is not material that the ascended master can use in the more than human work that he does. When the student has not a strong, controlled, well-developed vehicle, he is unable to cooperate with an ascended master, and thus do work of a kind which is beyond that of ordinary human experience. Were one of these perfected beings to take a student without such qualities into his field of work, he would be making the same mistake one does in building a machine or home if he constructs it of imperfect material. That kind of material naturally could not stand unusual strain, under sudden need, or prolonged service. Thus it would not be the part of wisdom, love, or mercy to subject anyone to an experience for which he has neither the training nor is strong enough to bear. As the ascended masters are the acme of perfection, they naturally would not do anything except that which is just, loving, and wise. The attitude of one who wishes to work in conscious cooperation with the ascended host should not be, "I wish I could go to them for instruction," but rather, "I will so purify, discipline, and perfect myself, become such an expression of divine love, wisdom, and power, that I can assist in their work. Then I will automatically be drawn unto them. I will love so constantly, so infinitely, so divinely, that the very intensity of my own light will open the way for them to accept me." My son, self-correction and control of the forces within the use of human consciousness is not the work of a moment, nor a path of ease, lethargy, and self-gratification, for the senses riot within the average human being, and he rebels furiously against the restraint of his lower nature, which is imperative if he is to govern these forces properly within himself, especially in his feelings, so they may be used and act only under the conscious dominion of his God-mind. The saying that many are called but few are chosen is very true. All are constantly being called, but few are awake enough to realize the ecstatic joy and perfection within the God-self, and to hear its voice in the light, forever and forever calling everyone back into the Father's house. Every individual on earth is free each moment to arise and go unto the Father, his God-self, if he will but turn his back upon the creation of the human senses, and hold his attention on the only source in the universe from which peace, happiness, abundance, and perfection can come. There is a way for all to come into contact with the ascended masters, and that is to think upon them, call unto them, and they will answer every call with their own presence of love. But the motive for the call must be love of the one source, love of the light, love of perfection. If this be real, determined, and steadfast, the student will receive greater and greater light, for the light knows its own and gives of itself unceasingly, unconditionally, every moment. Ask, and ye shall receive. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. Seek, and ye shall find. Call unto the light, and the ascended masters will answer you, for they are the light of this world. Lotus served as a priestess in the temple of Mitla for more than 40 years with you and your son. By the combined efforts of you three, the various cities in the colonies were brought to a state of great perfection. You established industries and directed the agriculture until prosperity abounded in the land. It was revealed to the Inca ruler that he was to finish his earthly pilgrimage and service in that civilization. It was then he called the three of you home to him. Others were appointed to take your places, and with blessings and love to your people, you bade them farewell. On your arrival home, the king was much surprised to find none of you had aged during the long absence. Your youthful appearance was the result of training received in childhood, and still greater proof that his children had been divinely sent in answer to his prayer. Deep gratitude to the one mighty God for blessing him, his children, and the people always filled his heart. At this point, as Saint Germain described the Incan embodiments, living pictures began to appear in the atmosphere before me, all in their original color and activity. They lasted for nearly 3 hours, and he revealed those ancient experiences as a living reality in Peru and Mitla. The Inca ruler called the 14 from the Golden City together in preparation for the most important event of his earthly pilgrimage. He knew the hour of passing was near, and the affairs of the empire had to be transferred into the control of the elder son, whom he was to appoint his successor at the banquet. The palace was famous for centuries as the most magnificent building of the period, because the king had tremendous resources at his command throughout the entire reign. He lived close to his God-self at all times, and wealth untold flowed into his use. The interior of the palace was most ornate, private rooms of the royal family being decorated in pure gold, set with jewels, and the symbol of the sun used wherever possible as a constant reminder of the God-self within. The banquet hall was set with 5 tables of carved jade, resting on white onyx pedestals, each seating 20 people, with the exception of the royal table, at which were 16, these being the 14 from the Golden City, the king, and the master, Saint Germain, who was then known as son Uriel. Chairs at the king's table were made of gold, slightly canopied with gorgeous ostrich plumes in magnificent colors. In the Inca's chair, the plumes were a beautiful violet, in Saint Germain's an intense gold, the daughter's pink, the eldest son's violet, but of a lighter shade than the ruler's, and those in the chair of the younger son white, representing the authority of the priesthood. Plumes in the chairs of the rest of the 14 from the Golden City were of varying colors, beautiful beyond description, the color in each case representing the office and service that each occupant gave to the empire. Cloths of a very soft material, heavily embroidered with thread of remarkable brilliancy, covered the tops of the tables. The entire palace was lighted by self-luminous crystal globes that Saint Germain gave to the Inca ruler when his instruction first began. The king wore a royal robe of golden metallic-like fabric, with a marvelous jeweled breastplate representing the sun. Over this was his robe of office, made of rich purple fabric, trimmed with magnificent ostrich plumes around the entire edge, and a deep collar. His crown was a band of diamonds that held 3 violet plumes at the back. These 3 plumes, in the inner life of the ruler, symbolized the 3 activities of the Godhead, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, acting through man as love, wisdom, and power. The 2 sons were clothed in garments similar to their fathers, except for the long robe of state, each wearing the symbol of the great sun formed by a breastplate of jewels. The crown of the elder son was set with emeralds, and the plumes at the back were violet like the king's, but of a lighter shade. The headdress of the other son was set with pearls, and his plumes were white, another symbol of his office as priest. The king's daughter was robed in a golden fabric fine as gossamer silk, with an overdrape of opalescent material, dazzling to behold, that changed color with every movement of the body. She wore a jeweled girdle of diamonds and emeralds, with its panel reaching nearly to the floor. On her head was a close-fitting cap of woven material, and around the neck a chain on which hung the symbol of the great sun, set in diamonds, rubies, and emeralds. Her sandals were of gold, also jeweled. Just as the king left his private chambers on the way to the banquet hall, a blazing light flashed through the rooms, and Saint Germain stood before us, looking like a god. The light about him was almost blinding in its brilliance, and it took us a few seconds to become accustomed to it. His beautiful golden hair hung to the shoulders and was held in place by a band of blue diamonds around the forehead. His own intense radiance shone through the color of the hair until it looked like sunlight. The piercing, sparkling violet of his eyes contrasted strongly against his skin, that revealed the soft pink color of youth and perfect health. His features were very regular, like those of the ancient Greeks. He wore a robe of marvelous, dazzling white fabric, entirely different from anything in our modern world. It fitted the body slightly at the waist, around which was clasped a girdle of yellow diamonds and sapphires, with a panel reaching to his knees. On the third finger of his left hand was a ring set with a gorgeous yellow diamond, and on the middle finger of his right a sapphire almost as brilliant, both blazing tremendously because of his own great radiation, as he had just come from the Golden City. The king was surprised and overjoyed at his appearance, and making the sign of the heart, the head, and the hand, bowed low before him and offered the master his arm. They proceeded thus into the banquet hall. Here, tables had been laid with an entire service of gold, crystal, and jade. Children of the king soon entered, and when they beheld their beloved master were almost overcome with joy. However, they did not forget the dignity of the occasion, and making the divine sign he had taught them, bowed low before their father and distinguished guest. The signal was given, and all were seated. The king sat at the head of the table, the master, Saint Germain, at his right, and next to him his daughter. The elder son was placed at his left, and the younger son next, then the rest from the Golden City. At the close of the banquet, the ruler arose, and all gave complete attention. He stood silent a moment, and extending his hand to the beloved Saint Germain, introduced him to the guests. The master bowed graciously, and the king told them how the higher spiritual law had been taught to him and his children, and how the great blessings which had come to the land and its people were the result of the master's great love. He explained further that the banquet had been given for him to appoint his successor to the throne. He signaled to the elder son to rise, and announced him as their future ruler. Removing the royal robe, he placed it upon the son's shoulders, and Saint Germain, raising his hands above him in blessing, said, "I bless you, my son, in the name and power of the one mighty God, in man and governing the universe, whose supreme wisdom shall direct you, whose light shall illumine you, whose love shall bless and enfold you, the land and its people." Touching the thumb of his right hand to the forehead of the son, the beloved master raised his left hand, and a blinding flash of light enfolded them. The king then appointed those who were to take the places of his daughter and 2 sons in the temple at Mitla. Saint Germain, the king, his children, and the rest of those from the Golden City proceeded into the throne room, where the master turned and again addressed them, saying, "Beloved ones of light, your brother, the king, will soon pass to his well-deserved rest and higher instruction. Until that time I will remain with you. Your civilization will reach its apex under the rulership of this our beloved brother, and you will need much added wealth to accomplish all that is to be done. In the heart of the mountains, not far distant, is great treasure of gold and precious stones. The younger son of your ruler has not so far recalled a faculty he used formerly. I will quicken it into action again, that the requirement of your future activities be supplied." He stepped toward the younger son and touched his forehead with the thumb of his right hand. A tremor passed over the body, and his inner sight became opened. He saw in the mountain fastness a certain location, which held such vast wealth he knew they would need no other supply for whatever might be required to produce the things they were to use in the outer activities. The son made obeisance to his beloved master, and promised that with his assistance the plan for its use would be fulfilled. 3 of the mines which he opened and operated were closed and sealed when the reign of those from the Golden City was finished. They have remained closed to this day. Archaeologists, in various ways from time to time, are finding evidence and proof of the tremendous height to which this civilization reached, and the splendor of its attainment. The fragments of the Incan activities they have discovered so far are of the civilization during its decline, but the day will come when that which was expressed at its apex will be revealed to the blessing, enlightenment, and service of posterity. The following day messengers were sent to the principal points in the empire, announcing the ascension to the throne of the king's son. His reputation had preceded him from the city of Mitla, for his wisdom, nobility of character, and justice were known throughout the kingdom during the years he served there. A few days later the younger son directed the head mining engineer to prepare equipment, men, and supplies for going into the mountains and opening the mine that he had been shown through the use of his inner sight. When they were ready to start, the son remained alone, and held his attention fixed steadily on the God-self within, knowing that he would be directed unerringly in finding the mine, and because of this had no difficulty or delay in going directly to the location shown him in the vision. He put a large number of men to work, and in 60 days had opened the mine to the point where they made contact with the richest gold vein that has ever been located in South America before or since that time. The discovery and operation of that mine has come down to the present day in legend among the people. The younger son returned from his achievement amidst the warm welcome of the people, and received the blessings of his father, Saint Germain, his older brother and sister. The location of the mine was at an altitude of 8,000 feet, and during the time the king's son was there, he became highly sensitized, an activity that always occurs at high elevations. Upon his return to the palace, he felt clearly the time had arrived for the Inca ruler to make the great change, and knew his passing was near. The day arrived for the coronation of the king's son, when he was to assume legally and publicly the responsibility and duties of the realm. The royal family asked their beloved master and friend to perform the act of crowning the new ruler, to which he graciously agreed. Elaborate preparation for the important event had been completed, and the ceremony had progressed to the moment when the crown was to be placed upon the head of the new ruler. All noticed that Saint Germain made no effort to receive it. Suddenly there was a blinding flash of light, and before them stood a most wonderful being. She seemed to be a girl of only 18, but from her eyes and presence shone forth a dazzling radiance, filled with the love, wisdom, and power of a goddess. The light that filled the atmosphere around her was crystal white, sparkling within itself and scintillating constantly. Extending her dainty hands to the crown-bearer, she lifted the crown and with infinite grace placed it upon the head of the king's son, and in a voice that was the very soul of music said, "Beloved of the Golden City, I crown you with love, light, and wisdom, of which this crown is the symbol. May your justice, honor, and nobility ever continue. By a divine order I shall reign with you, invisible to all but those of the Golden City who are here." The new ruler knelt to receive the crown, and the wondrous being stooped and kissed his forehead. She then turned to the assembled guests, extended her hands, and blessed them. Immediately a soft rose-colored light filled the entire place, it being the outpouring of her love to them. She blessed the former king, and turning to his daughter held her in a fond embrace. To the younger son she extended her hand, and he, kneeling, kissed it with deep reverence. The new king ascended the throne and bowed to his guests. Offering his arm to the beautiful being, he led the way to the banquet hall, and here they celebrated the coronation by a feast. He gave the signal to be seated, and then addressed them. "My greatly beloved people," he said, "I know there is but one mighty presence, God in mankind and the universe governing all. It is my desire, as it ever has been, to so live that my mind and body are clear channels and perfect expressions of the one great indwelling presence. May you, my friends, my people, our land and its activity be always blessed with God's greatest love, peace, health, and happiness. May this empire, which is God's domain, and of which we are but the custodians, continue in abundant prosperity. The love of God in me shall always enfold you, and I ask God's eternal light to raise you into his divine perfection." As the banquet progressed, the former king grew very pale. The new ruler signaled his brother, who stepped to his father's side and assisted him to the private rooms of the royal family. The king lay down and remained motionless nearly 4 hours. His children, the Master Saint Germain, and the beautiful being remained at his side. When the final moment of his earth span arrived, the beautiful being stepped forward to the head of the couch on which he lay, and addressed him, saying, "Brother Inca, thou hast thought to leave thy form to the action of the 4 elements, but I say to thee, it shall be raised, transmuted and illumined into that eternal temple of God that expresses all perfection. Thy great service hath freed thee from the wheel of birth and so-called death. Be thou now received by the ascended host of light, with whom thou art forever one." Slowly the body was raised into its eternal perfection, and then completely disappeared. Saint Germain turned to those who stood by. "My work here is finished," he said, and stepping forward, placed a ring of most unusual design upon the 3rd finger of the king's right hand. Its jewel was a miniature self-luminous globe of some kind of precipitated substance that looked like pearl, and directly within the center was a tiny blue flame. It was a focus of light, the same as the globes Saint Germain had given the king's father, with which the palace was lighted. "Accept this," he continued, "from the master of the Golden City. It is his request that you wear it upon your person always." Bidding them farewell, and bowing graciously, he disappeared from sight. The Inca's 3 children had perfect physical bodies due to the instruction they had received in childhood from the Master Saint Germain, when he came daily from the Golden City to prepare them for their life service to the people. All had most beautiful golden hair and violet blue eyes. The 2 sons were fully 6 feet 3 inches in height, and the daughter about 5 feet 7. There was a great natural dignity of bearing, suggesting the inner dominion which they had gained under his instruction. When the elder son ascended the throne, he was 68 years old, yet looked not more than 25. Even at the time they left the earth, none looked more than that age. The new king reigned 47 years, living to the age of 115. The daughter lived to be 113, and the younger son 111. The Incan people of that period were all dark-eyed and dark-haired, with skins like the American Indian. Those who incarnated as the mass of the Incan people were not souls of previous advanced knowledge, as was the case in some of the former civilizations, such as Egypt, Atlantis, and the Sahara Desert. For this reason, the great host of ascended masters who assist in expanding the light within humanity placed the Incan ruler, his children, and the rest of the 14 from the Golden City in charge of the government and its people to establish the pattern upon which the later activities were to be molded. They designed a form of government and a plan of development which, if adhered to, would have enabled the entire civilization to reach a great height of outer accomplishment, and at the same time receive tremendous inner illumination. As the time drew near to select a ruler from among the Incans themselves, to succeed the king and his assistants, great care was taken to choose those whose inner growth was most advanced. 14 were found to take the places of those from the Golden City. The beautiful being had made herself visible to the king every day for 47 years, giving advice and assistance through her radiation, that wisdom and strength might be the directing power of the people. The successors to the king and the 14 from the Golden City were called into the presence of the much-loved and wise ruler, and the beautiful being, who had been invisible, made herself visible to all. The light about her grew very bright, and she addressed them, saying, "For over 90 years the great ascended masters of light have taught, enlightened, blessed, and prospered the people and this empire. The example is before you. If you follow it, all will continue to prosper and bless your land. If you do not keep the love for the one supreme God Self first in your hearts, and acknowledge him always as the ruler of the empire and its inhabitants, decay will set in, and the glorious perfection enjoyed for over a century will be forgotten. I commend you to the care of the great Supreme Presence in all. May he ever protect, direct, and enlighten you." Here a visible proof of the existence of the inner God-self of each human being was revealed to those who were to guide the destiny of the empire during the succeeding years. This same example will again be given to the present people of America. Then, in the presence of the new ruler and his associates, the king and the 14 from the Golden City stepped out of their bodies and revealed the divine self of each, visible to all assembled. In a few moments the physical bodies disappeared, dissolving in ambient air. Thus, explained Saint Germain, is revealed to you the record of another life, the blessing and achievement which results from loving acceptance of the supreme presence of the one God Self within. Let us now go back to the royal Teton. We returned to the entrance and passed forward to the audience chamber. There on its walls were the portraits etched in gold, transferred from the ancient temple of Mitla. We went on to the record room and saw the records carried by the beautiful glistening beings. Other things, too, had been brought, which I have not permission to reveal. As these experiences ended, I realized, at least partially, something of what real love is, for no one can possibly explain the intense feeling of love and gratitude one has for the ascended masters, after being permitted the experiences I had passed through since first meeting Saint Germain. It can never be put in words. There is only one overwhelming desire in life after such contact, and that is to be what they are. Then one comes to realize what Jesus meant by the Father's house, and where the home of the soul really is. Once he has really, even for the fraction of a second, experienced the ecstatic bliss radiating from an ascended being, there is nothing in human experience he would not endure or sacrifice in order to reach that height of attainment, and work for in order to express such dominion and love also. One really knows such perfection is for all of God's children, and is as real as reality can be. Even the happiest life lived by the average human being is certainly the husks of existence compared to the ascended state of these great ones. The most beautiful and so-called perfect creation of human beings, with all their boasted power and accomplishment, is coarse and crude compared to the freedom, beauty, glory, and perfection that is the daily, continual experience of every one who has raised the body as Jesus did. I was almost overwhelmed by a feeling of gratitude and love to Saint Germain as it came time to return to my body. He realized how I felt and understood my position. "My son," he said, "you cannot receive what has not been earned. You deserve this and much more, which will become evident as we advance. Remember, however, what seems mysterious only appears so because it is unexplained. When understood, all unusual occurrences will be found natural and according to law. The following truth shall remain engraved on your memory forever. It is this: every one of God's children who will acknowledge and accept the presence of the one mighty God, anchored within his heart and brain, and feel that truth deeply many times a day, realizing and knowing God fills his mind and body so full of light there is no room for anything else, he can be free. The one all-powerful presence is the mighty harmonious activity of one's life and affairs, and if his attention be fixed firmly with determination on this eternal truth, no height of attainment is too great for him to reach. There is but one source and principle of life to which we should give our undivided attention, and that is the God-self within every individual. To the great harmonious self, the personal self should give conscious recognition at all times and keep in constant intercommunion with it, no matter what the outer activity of the mind is. This one great self is the life energy flowing through every human body each moment, by which all are enabled to move about in the world of form. It is the wisdom flowing through the mind, the will directing all constructive activities, the courage and strength sustaining every one, the feeling of divine love with which all force can be qualified as it flows through the individual, the only power that can ever accomplish any good thing. It is the all-victorious, conscious dominion over every condition of human activity, when released through the personal self without resistance or interruption. This mighty God-self within you is the supreme ruler of all creation, and the only dependable, permanent, and eternal source of help in existence. Only through its love, wisdom, and power can anyone ever rise into the ascended mastery, for constant, conscious communion with it is freedom and dominion over all human creation. When I say human creation, I mean all that is discordant and less than perfect. We returned to my body, and as soon as I had re-entered it, Saint Germain took my hands and poured a stream of his divine energy through me to sustain and give strength. I instantly felt revivified in both mind and body. I sat down, fixed my attention with deep intensity upon my own God presence, and offered up a prayer of gratitude for the tremendous blessings I had been privileged to receive. He bowed graciously and disappeared.